I'm not saying anything yet. Well, I am now, but I wasn't saying anything because you never know when you're actually on. Hi, how's it going, everybody? How do you want Ken to address you? Ugh, that sounds so. John McKee doing the roll call, everybody. Scones. I prefer scones. I like a good crumpet. There's Matthew, there's Hank, there's John, there's Brian, there's Media Cafe Online, whose name I can't remember, Webb, Ryan, Donna, Chuck, Bill, Roger, Sloth Bear 2, The Quickening. No, that was 3. Eugene, Rick, Andrew, Paul. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I know what we're doing. I don't know. Well, Bill can tell you. Why don't we do a show? Or whatever this is going to be. Virtual room to mess up. It is Thursday, the 21st of January, 2021, and this is macOS Can Live. I was going to ask when I got old, but it's a thing that happened and keeps happening. Hi, I'm Ken Ray, welcoming you to another edition of macOS Ken Live. This offshoot of macOS Ken, which is a daily news and news related to Apple News, or daily Apple News and news related to Apple News story show that I've been doing for 15 years next week. And you can tell I'm getting good at it because I think I messed up talking about it like 9 times. Anyway, macOS Ken Live is a thing that we do every afternoon, Monday through Friday anyway, 3:30 Pacific, 6:30 Eastern, other times, other places. A lot of times this show is talking over things that we've either talked about on macOS Ken or talking about things that we're going to talk about on macOS Ken. And today's show is nothing we're going to talk about on macOS Ken. I think I have to mention on macOS Ken that it happened because it's such a big story. But the story is the story, not anything that's said in the story. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Bloomberg has run a piece all about Apple's entry into virtual reality. Virtual reality, not augmented reality. And of course, it comes with the usual Bloomberg caveat. This is so far out, Apple may change its plans or it may scrap the whole thing. So basically, this could be science fiction. Now, I do believe the people at Bloomberg have actually talked to somebody who either knows something or says they know something. I believe that. I don't think they're literally just making the whole thing up. I do think it's so early right now that they might as well be, but I can't decide if I want to talk about what I think about virtual reality first or talk about the story first. I think I kind of want to talk about my whole. Some of you might have heard this story before. The first time I heard about virtual reality was in the winter of 1990. I was in film school and went into a class that was supposed to be about 3 hours long. And our professor, great guy, documentary filmmaker, Mark Lepore, who sadly went on to his great reward a few years ago. Mark said, "We're not having class today. You guys can go home if you want to. What I'm going to encourage you to do is come down to the big theater." It was like an auditorium. Come down to the auditorium because there's this guy there and he's talking about the future. The guy's name is Jaron Lanier, and what he's talking about is virtual reality. So the first time I heard about virtual reality was from the guy who invented virtual reality. And he said we were maybe, and this was in 1990, he said we were like 5 years away from everybody having this. A fun story, I got to interview Lanier in the year 2000 when I was working for Tech TV Radio. And I said, "So in 1990, you said 5 years, and I was trying to get to, what were the hurdles? What were the things? I really wanted to go someplace." Turns out he was a little touchy about having been wrong. I can't remember if we eventually got to a place where I got to ask my question because he was kind of PO'd that I brought that up. The thing is, when I heard about that in 1990, all of what, 20 years old, I guess, I was unfettered by how is this going to happen? I was unfettered by what purpose does this serve? I was unfettered by wondering about business models. Somebody stood up and said, I have this amazing new technology, or we're going to at some point. And my friends and I, Eli, I can't say Eli's last name because, well, it just feels rude. I haven't talked to Eli since close to that day, honestly. But Eli and I were walking down the street, just blown away by all the possibilities. And, being art school kids, we were also horrified by some of the dystopic possibilities or dystopian possibilities, but we were really turned on by the technology, by the possibilities of it. Flash forward more years than I like to consider, and there is this crazy piece in Bloomberg. Now, it's not crazy because it could well be true, although it also reminds me, remember the stories that we used to get that occasionally Apple would give misinformation to somebody and then wait for that misinformation to bubble to the surface. And then once that information bubbled to the surface, Apple knew who was talking. There's a lot of crazy stuff in this article. First of all, the fact that we're talking about AR and not VR is kind of weird because Tim Cook, near as I can figure, has never talked about virtual reality. He has, however, said that augmented reality is going to change everything, that we're going to one day wonder how we lived without augmented reality, the same way that we wonder now how we lived without smartphones or how we lived without the web. Happier? Maybe. Could be one answer, but, that's a whole other thing for a whole other thing. Yeah, happier, says the guy who makes his living on the web, who's talking to you right now on the web. So it's weird to me that we're talking about virtual reality, but here's what Bloomberg says. It will display an all-encompassing 3D digital environment for gaming, watching video, and communicating. AR functionality, the ability to overlay images and information over a view of the real world, will be more limited. The plan originally was to have this VR thing, which I didn't think was anybody's original plan, but the plan originally was to have this VR thing in 2022. So next year, going up against Facebook's Oculus, Sony's PlayStation, VR headsets from HTC, and other people. This is all, of course, according to secret people who asked not to be named because they like being employed. And who can blame them? The company is building a high-end niche product that will prepare outside developers and consumers for its eventual more mainstream AR glasses. Not going to be cheap if this Bloomberg story is to be believed. Things like the Oculus and the HTC things and the Sony things run anywhere from $300 to $900, and this will be considerably more than that. And they're not planning on selling any of them, or many of them. They're figuring that they would sell one per store per day. And if you're assuming about 500 stores, you're looking at 180,000 units a year, according to this Bloomberg piece. They talk about what the headset is codenamed. I don't know that I really care about that. It's going to be standalone, and this is kind of weird to me. Well, let's talk about the hardware first. Powerful processors, something like the M1 or more powerful, going to run hot, so it's going to need a fan. Initially, it was too large and too heavy. There was some concern about neck strain, so they've done a couple of things like put the thing closer to your face, which means if you wear glasses, you can't wear your glasses, but they've made it so that you could actually get in some prescription glasses. And this sounds nuts. It sounds nuts. Apple originally planned to include less powerful processors and offload much of the work to a hub in the user's home that would wirelessly beam content to the headset, says Bloomberg, but the idea was squashed by Johnny Ive, Apple's design chief at the time, is what Bloomberg said at the time. The headset's designed to work as a standalone device, meaning it can operate on a battery rather than be plugged into the wall or a Mac. That's similar to Facebook's VR product, while Sony's requires a PlayStation gaming console. Um, they're planning on putting fabric on the outside to reduce the weight. See, all of these things sound like things you would tell some guy that you're afraid is snitching. All of these things sound like something that you would tell some guy, hey, don't tell anybody, but here's what we're seeing. And then they wait to see if it turns up in the press. And I'm not saying that's what's happening, but this sounds nuts. And I'm bothered by how nuts it sounds to me because I want to be the 20-year-old kid who's like, I don't care, just put it on my head, just put it on my face because I want to see this. I want to see this happen. Somewhere in there, they're trying to sell the idea that Apple knows what it's doing as far as displays, as far as processors and things like that. Certainly, Apple is working hard on batteries, and so you want to do the whole thing. It is, as Michael Gartenberg said to me 12 years ago, I guess, there is no better product than the imaginary Apple product. You want to believe that Apple could do this. If anybody could do this and do it well, Apple could do it. But the whole basis of this article seems to be that Apple's not even trying to do this well. I mean, it might be great, but it'll be great for the 8 people who can afford it. And then we have to get to the whole part with developers. Then we have to get to the whole part with what's it going to do. And I hate to keep coming back to this, but we have to get to the part of what problem does it solve? Now, maybe it doesn't have to solve a problem, and I would love it if it didn't have to solve a problem. Maybe it's just fun. Maybe it is just watching movies and playing games and communicating, which today, in 2021, in our 10th month of the pandemic, something that gave me that in like a real feeling way would be fantastic. I know that Facebook has had problems with that kind of thing. Facebook launched a thing where you could rent movies, and so it would be like watching a movie in a theater, and well, nobody cared, so they closed that down. I do know because I had an Oculus Rift for a while, and that was wildly disappointing. And I think again about, that 20-year-old kid who heard about VR for the first time. If you had ever told me that I would have a VR rig and would do anything besides use that VR rig, I'd have said you were high. And then I got one, and it's heavy, and you end up with a little bit of vertigo. And honestly, my biggest problem was I didn't own the machine. Well, second biggest problem. My biggest problem was it was a Windows machine. It was a great gaming rig. There was a teenager in my life who hated the fact that I never bought a single game for that machine because it was tricked out, because it had to be tricked out to run the Oculus Rift. It wasn't my machine, and so I knew that I wouldn't necessarily have that machine forever, and so I didn't spend a lot of money on games. I don't spend a lot of money on games anyway, but if you wanted games for the Oculus Rift, you had to spend a lot of money. They're priced like console games, which, I mean, I guess if you can spend however many hundreds of dollars or maybe even over $1,000 or whatever, that there seemed to be indicating that Apple would be charging for this thing, paying 60 bucks for a game wouldn't be that big a deal. I don't know. The whole thing just it feels half baked, and it made me wonder about a bunch of other stuff. We'll finish with the hardware first. Prototypes of the headset, some of which are about the size of an Oculus Rift, include external cameras to enable some AR features. They're testing using the cameras for hand tracking, and they're also working on a feature where a user could type virtually in the air to input text. It's unclear if that function will be ready for the first version of the device or if it will ever leave the exploratory stage. See, there's all these little things that make it kind of hard to glom to. So I got some other thoughts on it that are less about what's in the Bloomberg piece and more just, well, stuff that I'm coming across, which I'll get to in a moment. But first, I want to remind you about another show that I do, The Checklist by Secure Mac. I had said yesterday that we were going to talk about a Johns Hopkins University study that looked at sort of the balance that Apple strikes between security and convenience. I learned a lot from writing up that show. So it's out today. It is episode 215. I think it's called, I can't remember what I called it. I believe it is really, oh no, seriously locking down your iPhone. Seriously locking down your iPhone. It is checklist number 215, brought to you by Secure Mac. I had a tremendous amount of fun doing it because I learned a lot from it, which is always what I hope for that show. Because if I learn something, then I got to figure somebody else is learning something too. And we also followed up on the interview that we did with Patrick Wardle a few weeks ago about Apple flouting the firewall. So I'd love it if you checked it out. The show is called The Checklist. It is brought to you by Secure Mac. A couple ways to find it. You can either search wherever you get podcasts for The Checklist by Secure Mac, or you can go to the show's site, securemac.com/checklist. And yeah, let me know what you think. So I called today's show Virtual Room to Mess Up. And I kind of wonder if we have taken that away. The thing that I find most disappointing about this Bloomberg article is how disappointed I am by this Bloomberg article and how disappointed other people are as well. Two headlines that I came across just in the course of doing my daily thing. Cult of Max headline: Apple's first VR headset could be an expensive disappointment. Fortune's Philip Elmer DeWitt. No, formerly of Fortune. Man, I called him that for years. Apple 3.0's Philip Elmer DeWitt. The virtual reality headset in Apple's Skunkworks sounds like a hot mess. It does. It sounds like a hot mess. And I wonder what we would think about whatever is in Project Titan right now if we could actually see what's in Project Titan right now. I'll bet it looks terrible. Well, 5 years ago, I'll bet it looked terrible. 3 years ago, it probably looked horrible. I'll bet they've worked on so much stuff for the car, whether it's actually going to be a physical car or a service or whatever. I'll bet they worked on so much stuff on that if you would put all of that into one article and said, here's where Apple's going, it would have sounded ghastly. Maybe trying to put all of this in one article, or maybe trying to do it so early, or maybe trying to do it with, without a clear idea of everything that's going into it, makes it ugly. So I tried to think about the things that that we could do with this thing. And the problem is I still get caught on AR versus VR because, again, Tim Cook's always talked about AR. Something about AR is really exciting to me. At the same time, I'm disappointed by the possibilities, which I don't understand, and I don't know what they're going to be. When I talk to people about, what would you want AR to do, it was things like I had friends who said, what I would love it to do is if I'm like at a party and I see somebody and I look at them and I can't remember their name, I want my AR glasses to pop up their name and maybe some stuff that I know about them. It's very helpful. It's also very grown up. Directions are another thing that people talk about. And I want to say I read, golly, it might have been a William Gibson novel that talked about having basically a guide that pointed you places and took you places. But it was like a person. It wasn't like a, in 300 feet, turn left kind of thing. It wasn't arrows. It was like a dude or a gal, I suppose. I will say when I had the Oculus Rift, the thing that I really liked and appreciated was, so there was a company called Sansar. Sansar actually worked with, Sansar was from the same people who did Second Life. Linden Labs did Second Life, and then Linden Labs also did Sansar. Sansar's now been sold to somebody else. I don't know how they're doing. I don't know what they're doing. They had some stuff that was a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Ambitious, I think. But then they also had some stuff that was really incredible. They had this thing called, I want to say it was called the Explorers Club or something like that. And it was dedicated to Egyptian archaeology. But what was really neat were there were these 3 doors that you could go through. And those 3 doors took you to places that you could never go. They're real places. And they had been photographed by scientific expeditions or something like that, who had gotten permission from the government of Egypt to actually go in. And so you could, with the Oculus Rift, in this virtual area, go into like burial chambers that you'd never be able to go into otherwise. And you could actually get close enough. You could because of the whole VR thing and because of the way the Oculus was set up, you could lean as close to the wall as you could get. I mean, to the point that you can actually pick up the pixels because you're, getting that close. You would hope that Apple would do better than something where you can actually lean in and see the pixels. But one of the greatest things was for a little bit, I felt like I was standing in this tomb. I felt like I was standing in this place that I would never be able to see. If you could do that with art, if you could do that with art museums, if you could do that with places that, we would otherwise never be able to go, that would be, fascinating. And then if you could do that with friends or family members from other places, that would be fascinating as well. Games, of course, are a natch. Games are an absolute natural for this, although there's a lot of stuff that has to be kind of taken care of. Like, if I spent an hour in an Oculus Rift, I felt sick because of the moving around and the not really moving around, if you know what I mean. The way that Sansar solved this was instead of like, walking from place to place or floating from place to place, you would just sort of hop from place to place. Like you would point at a place in your field of view, you'd click a button and you'd suddenly be in that place. And while that does kill the reality aspect of it, it also keeps you from yakking. So that's a good thing. I don't know. It's interesting, and I wanna get back to when I think about things like that, when I think about the truly exciting, things that I played with, there was a painting app that you could play with in the Oculus, but you were painting in 3D. So it was kinda like sculpture, but not exactly. It was kinda like painting, but not exactly. And you could use different brushes like you would in, Pixelmator or Adobe Illustrator. You can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, you could be inside it, you could paint from the other side. I mean, there are all kinds of incredible things that you could do, almost to the point that you ended up with blank slate syndrome. Like there's, too much that you could do. And so it almost stymied you in a way. The idea of getting together for something like this would be fantastic. If instead of me looking at a camera and other people looking at me, if we were all in a setting where we could all sit and talk, that was another thing that Sansar did. It was okay. The way they did it was okay. You would hope it would get better. I don't know. Part of me worries, and there's no point in worrying because, there were people who said the iPhone was gonna be a failure before we even had the name iPhone out there. There were people who couldn't see past where we were to, the possibility of something more. Looking at this Bloomberg piece, part of me worries that they're making it look like such a mess that the whole thing's a joke before we even know if it's a real thing. And that's why I wonder whether we have virtual room to mess up. Maybe Apple can actually mess up, quote unquote, mess up in the whole car thing because we all know what cars look like. And so even if you hear that Apple is having trouble with this or it's taking longer to do that or they're not 100% certain, which way they're going to go, we still know what cars look like. And so we kind of assume that I mean, if we're somebody who believes in the Apple car, we kind of assume that Apple's going to get that right because people have been making cars for over 100 years now. People have been making cars for over 100 years now. People have been making cars for over 100 years now. So we kind of assume that Apple's going to get to that thing because we have a standard, what we think of a car being. We have no concept for what the AR and the VR thing is going to be unless you count Lawnmower Man and Johnny Mnemonic and a wonderful, wonderful episode of Community, season 6, which I know people hate season 6, but whatever. We have no clear idea of what this thing could be. We have no clear idea of what it could look like. And so that is, a perfect opportunity for people to stand on the side and say, well, this sounds stupid and terrible and like a disaster before it even comes out. Apple's first VR headset can be an expensive disappointment. Well, okay. It could also be step one of a multi-step process. It's possible that what Bloomberg is talking about is like some sort of developer something or other that most of us won't even get to have, let alone whether or not we would want to spend the money on it. And it's possible that Apple will chuck the whole thing. I'm still excited about the idea. I'm sad that it comes now with this tinge of, well, that's going to stink because I want it to be incredible. Kind of sorry we don't leave ourselves open to that possibility a bit more. Curious what your thoughts are on the whole thing. Are you excited about VR? Are you excited about AR? Does anything in this Bloomberg story ring true to you? Or do you think, you know, it's a bunch of guff and nonsense when we should be talking about next week's earnings call? There'll be plenty of time to talk about next week's earnings call next week. Hey, I got one bit of feedback before we part ways today. Talked yesterday. It was the goofy thing that we talked about yesterday, whether or not there's going to be an iPhone 13, because John Prosser had said, and I'm not saying John Prosser is goofy, but John Prosser had said there's not going to be an iPhone 13, at least not this year. It's going to be an iPhone 12s, he says. And then we'll skip to iPhone 14 because, 13. Jeremy wrote in to say, please, please, please let there be an iPhone 13. 13 has been a good number for me. Even Friday the 13th is usually good for me too. I would happily replace my 2020 SE, a year that should die, and become the new 13 as far as bad numbers. He'd happily trade in his new iPhone SE for an actual iPhone 13. So says Jeremy. So feel free to react to anything. Feel free to, throw in your comments on anything, because there's a halfway decent chance it'll end up here. You can always leave comments on this video. Well, yeah, you can always leave comments on this video, but probably the best thing to do actually is just email me, info@macoscan.com, info@macoscan.com. Got macOS Ken going again tomorrow morning. We'll be doing this one more time this week. Hope to see you here live, 3:30 Pacific, 6:30 Eastern, youtube.com/KenRay. Or you know what? Grab the audio podcast, as you may have already done. Talk to you soon. All right. I want to hear what you guys think. I want to see what you guys think. I want to read what you guys think. Community was awesome. Watched it when it was originally on. My brother-in-law and his fiance and I recently rewatched it, them for the first time by a Netflix party. Can I tell you, for a couple of years, I would watch Community and I would end the last episode and immediately start watching the next episode. I was in a constant rewatch of Community. Still waiting for the movie. 6 seasons in a movie. All right, I'm going back up to the top here. VR should be an add-on to AirPods Max. Darn it, I forgot. I hate when this happens. I can't believe that Apple would still be held hostage to what Johnny Ive thought would be a good idea. And I'm not saying that he was not. For Bloomberg to say, well, it was going to be a thing that tied to something else, but, then Johnny Ive said no, and then Johnny Ive quit, and Johnny Ive's been gone for 2 years, but we're still tied to that? It kind of seems unlikely. Boo-doo-doo. Predicting the future can be hard, Bill. You're right. You remind me, well, that reminds me of a joke, but I'm not going to do that joke. Nate says Apple showed some VR stuff a while back. It was related to the external Thunderbolt GPUs. I think it was a Star Wars Episode 3 volcanic Darth Vader thing. Perhaps it was just a demo of the GPUs. Yeah, they talked actually. That's an interesting point. They did talk when I believe when the new Mac Pro came out. I say new, it came out in 2019. But when the new Mac Pro came out, they talked about the fact that you would be able to develop for VR there. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Why would Apple care about developing for VR unless they were planning on people being able to use VR? That's an interesting idea too. And that something along those lines occurred to me, but I almost immediately discounted it. But you bring it up again is interesting, Matthew. Maybe Maybe VR is the reason that they have the expensive headphones to help kickstart the VR project that will give you surround sound when paired with said headphones. Well, if it's going to be something that goes on your head, though, I would think it would have to include the sound. But maybe they are getting you used to spending $600, $550 on something that you normally think of as 150 or 50 or 20, so that when they come out with this thing, it's like, it's $1,500. Sure, you could have a Mac. Sure, you could have two iPhones, or you could have this thing with three games. See, the developer side is the part that concerns me about Apple going into VR because, well, they have a good relationship with developers, and certainly there are lots of games in the App Store, but they're $10 games. Not that they couldn't be more. Hmm. Brian says, I found that the lasting technologies are the ones that solve a common problem rather than a niche interest. For example, 3D televisions didn't solve a common problem. Having access to real time communications and seeking information, such as a smartphone, does solve a common problem. That's true. Rob was late. Don't point at him. Hi, Rob. Glad you made it. Interesting. Matthew says part of the problem could be with the 3D TVs anyway, that he had a 3D TV, but you had to go and buy active 3D glasses, which were also expensive after buying an expensive television. That's a good point. I had a family member who had a 3D TV. It was great. Not worth the money to me, but it was cool when they had it. It was cool to watch it. Not the kind of thing I went for, though. But I always buy a small TV anyway. I think one day, maybe for my 60th, I'll get a great big TV, which I won't watch because I'll be wearing my Apple headset the whole time anyway. Oh, thanks, John. John says he listened to today's checklist. It was great, and he's going to send it to a few people. I thank you, man. I appreciate that. I mean, it was based on a couple of articles, and those articles were based on a journal thing. But, just hearing that something that I found interesting and something that I found worth bringing to people, to hear that other people found it. Thank you. That's what I'm saying. Now I'll be quiet. Oh, that's a horrible idea. I mean, it's not a horrible idea. Well, it is a horrible idea. Eugene says maybe that's what the VR thing is for Apple. Apple Car has no windows, 360-degree VR screens. I hate that idea. But do you remember the thing that they were talking about a couple of years ago where they were like, how we could make planes more aerodynamic and safer is if we didn't put windows where the passengers sit. But what we could do is we could do, screens that sort of like, have a constant picture of the outside. And that could be like your whole wall. Heck, you wouldn't even have a window. Man, do I hate that idea. Because sometimes I close the window because I don't want to see what's outside. Well, the window's always closed. I mean, the shade. And you couldn't get away from it. If the person over there is like, "Oh, I want to see this thunderstorm," and so they like turn their wall on. And now a lot of my fears. Flying and thunderstorms. You're welcome. Chuck says, did anybody read Damon by Daniel Suarez? It was the first description of AR that made sense to him. That's interesting because you're a William Gibson guy. I would have thought that something from Count Zero or Mona Lisa Overdrive would have done that. Not Neuromancer, as I remember. That's really funny. Starfleet Universe on Call, aka Paul, says, when it comes to the idea of sitting around the room together, I think that will not happen for a while. I think the ideas of our avatars being in that space together is more of what will happen. Okay. See, what's funny is when I was interviewing Lanier in 2000, he was actually working on a telepresence project that would make it like, you and I are sitting in the same room. Man, if he was upset about VR having missed, I kind of want to call him and ask him what happened. The guy's brilliant. I don't necessarily agree with everything, but he's brilliant. And, he swings at the fence, or he swings for the fence. And if he misses, he swings for the fence. We know his name because he keeps swinging, and because he has some amazing ideas, even if we don't all have them on our shelves as soon as we would like. And it's got to the part where Brian's talking about watching Community, so we're close to the end of the show, I think. Spent the late 90s at SGI, saw lots of early VR and lots of real-time walkthroughs of Egyptian crypts, St. Peter's Basilica, and even a human body. Of course, it took crazy expensive hardware. Hank, did anybody record Notre Dame? Hey, remember when Notre Dame burned? Nobody remembers that because, everything has happened in the past year. I'm lucky enough to have actually gotten to go to Notre Dame. Wouldn't it be great to have that kind of a resolution that we could all walk around again or still? I make people very uncomfortable at art museums. And when I say people, I only mean the people I'm with and the security guards, because I like to get like an inch away from a painting if I can. I like to get as close to the artwork as I can to see the actual brush strokes, or if it's a sculpture, to see the actual, the work that was done with the chisel. I like to get as close to this stuff as I possibly can. And VR would let you do that. And lots of people are going to spend $2,000 for that. I know. Hey, I'm at the thing after the thing, Webb. Thank you for welcoming me. I appreciate that. The after thing. Roger says Ive did his best work when he had Steve there to tell him no. That's really interesting, and I wonder if nobody wanted to do that, or if he felt like nobody could do that but Steve. I don't know. I remember being kind of sad that he was leaving, and I'm kind of okay now that he's gone, because I feel like Function has a bigger seat at the table, or a seat closer to the front of the table. Sorry. Eugene says cheap rooms on cruise lines now have screens instead of windows, doing the thing that I was talking about with the airplane. Yeah, I've heard about that. Kind of weird, but kind of cool. I assume you could play a movie on it too, which would be awesome. Oh, interesting. John says the windowless plane concept has only been floated for business jets so far. Some article I read was saying, maybe somebody was extrapolating from what you're talking about. Like maybe you're talking about like a real business case, because the article I was reading was like, jets, which seem both good and bad. Yeah, for business, that's a great way to start it, certainly. The windowless plane concept has only been floated for business jets so far, he says. If you're the only one on the plane, you can put up anything you want. Good God. No, I then it's just me talking, though. Sorry. Matthew says maybe we could, turn this into a podcast, and, it'd be like another 20-minute thing. Call it the happy hour, even though it's only 20 minutes. Yeah, no. I'd like to find a way to get you guys involved. If I could do that, like, take calls or something. If I could do that, that'd be fun. That's funny. Eugene says on a windowless plane, they could just broadcast a previous flight and you'd never know. Except for, when you're looking outside and all of a sudden you feel the plane bank, but everything stays even, or everything banks, but the plane stays even. You would have to stock up on so many air sickness bags. All right. I gotta go. John. We don't all like to hear Ken talk. Okay. On all of those happy notes, thank you guys for being here. Thanks for listening to me work through my own stuff on VR. So here's what's funny. I'm not doing that show on macOS Ken. I'm not doing that story on macOS Ken. I'll probably tell people that we talked about it here as part of the thing, but I don't think it's a story. It's not even a big enough story to drive what's the word I'm looking for? Sentiment. Every time you talk about Apple Car, people get really excited because of how much money Apple could make an Apple Car and all the things they could do. This isn't even going to drive sentiment, I don't think. What would drive sentiment is if they release it and it's amazing, or if they release it and it sucks. But right now, it's such a nebulous concept in most people's minds that it doesn't do anything, I think. Anyway, I said I was leaving. People started telling me goodbye, and then I'm like, I'm going to keep talking. I got to run. Groceries will not buy themselves. You guys are wonderful. Let's do this again tomorrow. Take care.